All right, you curious, you courageous Herle Burly-ites. Today on the pod, a deep dive into recent party politics with two of Canada's finest political journalists. Tonda MacCharles and Bill Curry are with me today. Although their work has featured as our cursed clipping on the Curse of Politics many times, both of them are first-time guests here on the Herle Burly. Ms. MacCharles is a bureau chief and senior reporter in the Star's Ottawa bureau, covering federal politics and public policy for 20 years now. Her career includes nearly 10 years in broadcast journalism with CBC's The National and The Fifth Estate. She's a regular television panelist and reigns as a three-time political trivia champion on both CBC radio and CTV television networks. So there we go. We've got that going for us today.
I got to change that bio. That's a bunch of
Mr. Curry is the Globe and Mail's Deputy Ottawa Bureau Chief. He has over 2 decades of experience covering Parliament Hill, reports on a wide range of issues with a focus on finance and economics. He won the 2020 National Newspaper Award for Political Journalism as part of a team that covered the Liberal government's since-cancelled contract with the WE organization. Prior to the Globe, he covered federal politics for the National Post, Canwest News Service, the Hill Times, and studied journalism under the legendary Elie Alboim. So he's got that going for him. So today, a battle of the two most recent caucus retreats, Liberals and NDP, while the infighting is still fresh. What did leadership want those retreats to be about? What were they actually about? What did members of both parties think in the aftermath? Are they reassured about their leaders? Did they hear cogent planning for successful election campaigns? And what comes next? Bill and Tonda, thanks for joining me today to talk about this.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Thanks, David.
Bill, you're live in Montreal from the Delta Hotel.
That's right, yes. We're doing it on cam here.
Excellent. Our live correspondent. So what I'm interested in, we don't really focus on MPs all that much. And so this is a chance where they all got together. And in both cases, the party leadership had, I think, a lot of explaining to do to their caucuses about various things. So I'm kind of interested in what they heard at the retreats and what they thought about that and what they heard this summer in their riding. So let's start with the mood going into the retreats. Tonda, what was the vibe like as Liberal MPs gathered in Nanaimo?
Well, impossible to canvass all of them, but, me and my team spoke to, several dozen in the couple of weeks leading up to the retreat. And I think the mood, the best I can describe, it kind of reflected a little bit also the vibe I heard in Halifax at the cabinet retreat. Sort of they know that they have a long, slogging year ahead, if it's going to last a year, because between the cabinet and caucus retreat, of course, the NDP Liberal cooperation deal collapsed, which makes things a little bit more unstable for all of them. Suddenly, all their lives are a little bit more up in the air. They have to be more tethered to Ottawa for votes and whatnot. But I would say the mood was, they've heard a lot on the barbecue circuit this summer about politics and the cranky mood of the electorate and the let's admit it, the anger towards Justin Trudeau that we see reflected in the polls. And my sense of the mood ahead of both of these caucuses, however, given what they heard from the Prime Minister and the smaller listening groups at regional caucuses in the last month, before the big retreat, was the Liberals are resigned but not enthusiastic. They have resigned themselves to the fact that the Prime Minister insists he's not going anywhere, and no one will know until he announces it the day of, if he's changed his mind on that. But most people seem to have resigned themselves to the fact that he's decided to stay. He's going to lead them. There were a couple of, there was this change at the party, the head of the campaign when Jeremy Broadhurst left just before the retreat. So I think that, but resigned, but not enthusiastic. There's no joy in Liberal land right now, despite sort of the effort to put forward the positivity that they see reflected in the U.S. Democratic campaign right now. It's like, this message that the Prime Minister is giving to Canadians and that François-Philippe Champagne said, deliver, deliver, deliver is the mantra for the next several months for the government. That's well and good, but I think that for a lot of the MPs, that means a lot of work in committees and trying to push things out there for ministers, for sure, pushing stuff out the door that they've already set in motion in the face of a more unstable parliament. So resigned, no joy, no enthusiasm. In some determination, in others a bit of frustration. And I am not convinced we haven't heard the last of how many people are quitting.
There you go. That feels right to me, Tonda. That feels right. Well, let's flip across the country to Montreal, where the New Democrats were gathering. They had a big announcement going in, which was Singh had done the confidence and supply agreement. Are they going in there feeling good because they've accomplished a lot of things, Bill? Or are they going in there thinking, Christ, half of our caucus is going to lose their seats in the next election?
Well, I'm not sure it's exactly one of those or the other, but yeah, that was definitely a big announcement right before this meeting here, where they're gathered for 3 days in Montreal. And what was interesting about the rollout of the announcement was that Singh did it by video, and then he followed it up by a news conference in Toronto. So it was very leader-centric, and they kind of kept the MPs in the background. So this was, we definitely wanted to come here and kind of get the temperature of the room from the backbench MPs to see how they're feeling. I think, there's a lot of talking points, obviously, about the Liberals, but Alistair McGregor, BC MP, who's the caucus chair, I think he probably gave the most, what sounded like a truthful answer when he said essentially that his constituents were telling him that, you need to put some distance between yourselves and the Liberals because Justin Trudeau had become radioactive. And I think at its core, that's what this whole announcement was about, in a sense that an election is coming at some point relatively soon. It's at the moment shaping up to be a referendum on a pretty unpopular prime minister, and they want to distance themselves from that. You definitely wanted to find out this week too, like how eager are they? Are they really itching for an election? And I think the answer is clearly no. From talking to people the last few days, there's no appetite for that. They're very happy to just go back to they keep referencing the previous minority parliament, which was also a couple of years in length, and we know how that works. It's essentially, when you get the key votes like the fall update or budget time, the Liberals will look at the wish lists of the NDP and the Bloc and try to sprinkle a few things there, and that'll be in the budget, and that's how things move along. So it certainly adds more drama to the parliamentary cycle, but I really don't think anything is imminent. And we've certainly seen Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative leader, understandably, he's well out in the polls. He would love to have an election right now. He would love it to be on the carbon tax. But it's just, I don't think it's in the cards in the near future. I think one thing that really struck me that I hadn't quite dawned on me when Singh made the first announcement is when you spend some time with the NDP caucus, it's a reminder how BC heavy they are. Like it's 24 MPs, and 13 of them, I think, come from BC. And so their head is all in provincial election space. Like that's what they're talking about. That's what they're volunteering on. That's what they're knocking on. And that takes you through to the end of October. We've got a Saskatchewan election, similar timeline, the Brunswick timeline. So, you're not going to see an election, I don't think, overlapping with that. And then you're into November and Christmas. So I think my takeaway from spending a few days with the NDP MPs is, 2024 election is not on the table. We're looking at spring 2025 or, I guess fall is still possible, but I think 2024 is very unlikely.
My colleague Althea Raj in Nanaimo was telling me last night that there's a lot of BC Liberals that have showed up up at the federal Liberal retreat as well, because they're focused on the BC provincial eleation as well. Mm-hmm. And of course, there's two other provincial elections in the mix this fall, which, nobody wants to deplete the sort of ground game ranks for a federal campaign when there's pretty big provincial campaigns in the offing. So those factors, I think, weigh against an election sooner than later as well, like Bill said. But, I have covered 5 minorities and on Parliament Hill. And, big mistakes happen, like happened to the Clark government back in the day. But small mistakes happen too. And then small mistakes can, in committees or on big votes or motions, when negotiations go sour, can sour a mood pretty quickly and sow more distrust. And so, those are things to watch. And I think the MPs, back to the original point about what's the mood of the MPs in Parliament right now, they are acutely aware that they all have to up their game. And that can be an exhausting prospect when you look at the polls for the Liberals and the NDP.
Yeah, well, there's not much that's in their hands about how the election goes,
Exactly.
right? So they're sort of passengers on that. But I mean, Bill, are the New Democrat MPs all happy about the end of the confidence and supply agreement? Was that a divisive thing, or did they all want it done? And is that why Singh did it before the caucus?
Yeah, I think they're relieved. The only person, Carol Hughes from Sault Ste. Marie, was saying that she was torn about it. It kind of went back and forth. But beyond that, I think generally they were happy with it. A little bit of a mix of messaging from the backbench MPs on what exactly this means on, are there kind of smaller deals that come up, or is it really just one vote at a time? Because there was, Blake Desjardins from Alberta was talking about how it gives them leverage to have a new deal. He didn't use the phrase new deal, but that was the gist of it. You have a blank slate and you can go back and make new negotiations. And then, others didn't quite go that far down the road. So, but yeah, just a general sense of relief. And it is true that the vast majority of the items on that supply and confidence deal had been dealt with or very near the end, like the pharmacare bill is in the Senate. So the NDP doesn't have any senators, so there's not much they can do about that. So it was just kind of a sense that had run its course from a policy point of view, in addition to just wanting to distance themselves from the Liberals.
I'm 45 years on from high school, Herle Burly-ites, but it's the week after Labor Day, and I still can't shake the same feeling in the pit of my stomach. Excitement, mixed with a little fear, and confusion about why they call it a duotang. I finally looked it up. Duo is Latin for two. Tang is an Old Norse word for a sharp metal object fastened to a handle. Get it now? Me neither. In case you haven't figured it out already, this week's ad from our presenting sponsor, TELUS, centers on back to school and those essential school supplies. Should a cell phone be considered an essential school supply? I'll leave that one to the legislators. So let's talk about the paper, pencils, rulers, workbooks that maybe you took for granted just a little. The fact is, not all families have the means to provide these things to their kids. TELUS believes every child deserves an equal opportunity to thrive in their school journey and to start the school year with confidence and the tools they need to succeed, regardless of their financial situation. So almost 20 years ago, they created their Kits for Kids program. It's a brand new backpack filled with the stuff that made for a fresh start to each school year. Pencil case, coloring pencils, HB pencils, pens, erasers, ruler, exercise books, and loose leaf paper. All right, time for a quick arithmetic assignment. Take out your pencils and paper and no cheating. If TELUS has given out 225,000 kits for kids since 2006 and 20,000 this year alone, how many smiling faces has that produced across the country? Let me see. Carry the one, add to the next column. Geez, never mind. I'm like Jethro Bodine. I'm terrible at math, but it was a trick question anyway. The answer is incalculable. Learn more at TELUS.com, Kits for Kids. Tonda, this thing Singh's cancellation came as a kind of a surprise. In fact, even apparently to the government, it came as a complete surprise. How are the Liberal MPs feeling about it?
I think actually, I sense people are happy about it. I mean, one Liberal said to me, I quite look forward to Jagmeet Singh standing up sheepishly and voting with us over and over again this fall, because they get to now stand apart. There's no more pretense along the lines that they have to be cooperative. They can all have at each other, I think. The sense I get, is that, on the cabinet side, doing work with the NDP was, in fact, one of the ministers said to me, it was always a slog. It's going to continue to be a slog. On the MP side, my sense is they don't trust Jagmeet Singh. They don't trust the NDP caucus. There are a few cross the aisle relationships. Maybe I wouldn't say there's a ton of friendships. Ottawa's not the same kind of place where across the aisle friendships bloom the way they used to, years ago. So I would say that my sense, I could be corrected on this, but my sense is that a lot of Liberal MPs are happy that deal is done. They see that, working through issue by issue is doable. But I'm not sure that what I'm not sure about is that they have confidence in the team right now, the team at the center, to lead them sort of safely through to next June, even though they hear that's what the government wants to do.
Right.
That's where I think some of the, the disconnect might be.
Right. Bill, we were talking in the Curse of Politics about the way Singh executed this thing. And his rhetoric against the government was so damning that it makes it difficult to understand how he could ever vote for it again. So it kind of feels like it was checkers instead of chess, because they are going to have to stand up very, very quickly and eat a shit sandwich and vote to support a government that he decried as inept and beholden to corporate interests and not acting in the interests of Canadian people. I mean, there surely there was a more nuanced way to exit this thing than that scorched earth approach.
Yeah, and what struck me too is there was no particular reason. They didn't do the fig leaf of some policy disagreement, whether it was the rail strike or whatever, that this is the last straw. There was no reason at all listed in the video for doing this. So there's that, and to your point, exactly. Like, I think the benefit for the NDP in having the deal is it kind of lowered the temperature every time there was a confidence vote, and now it dramatically puts them in the spotlight every time there is a confidence vote. And to your point, like, it's very hard to defend why you are saying all these things about Trudeau and the Liberals, and then you're going to go vote for him, and it'll happen again and again. And the Conservatives make sure it happens all the time, and that they get a lot of attention on that. So it's it's a real challenge for the NDP to make this make sense, that you are really dead set against the Liberals, and you're going to presumably, at least most of the time, vote with them on key votes. So.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that the rhetoric was so incendiary, almost painting the Trudeau government as corrupt, that, begging the question of Mr. Singh, then how can you possibly support them on anything, is one thing. It also, if you were to look at it as the launch of some kind of news stage in his own pitch to Canadians about why he would be a better leader, and, to use his phrase, why he's running for prime minister now, even though we're not actually in a campaign that he's not prepared to trigger, is, how is he different? And so it forces the comparison between the Liberals and the NDP on those key planks, the dental care, the pharmacare, et cetera, whatever, and why he's ready to jeopardize those. But stylistically, I was quite sort of taken aback by, they do the campaign style video to exit the deal. The next day's news conference was one of the worst I've ever heard Mr. Singh do. And I've heard him do a lot of bad ones, because he often trips and stumbles over things like federal provincial lines of responsibility, basic stuff for a federal leader.
The unbearable lightness of Jagmeet Singh.
Goodness gracious, what was that? It was a robotic performance to the most logical question he could have been expected, which is, well, then what are you going to do about it when you're going to bring the government down? And repeatedly robotic answers. To me, if any Canadians were, most voters are going about their lives and paying attention to only sort of the odd high point or low point in politics. And if anyone bothered to see that video, if that went by, they would be baffled by the approach of it all. So that's more a stylistic thing and a kind of campaign political thing. But I think that we're going to see this over and over again, as Bill said, as each vote comes up, it's going to highlight it more. Tactically, are they ready for a campaign? Look, they've only got about 50 or 60 candidates nominated. Now, not everybody has got a full slate ready to go. The Conservatives are election ready money-wise, no question. Flush with cash, flying staffers all over the country to staff, 5-minute news conferences in Nanaimo or Halifax or wherever. But, they have about 100, and last check, 153 candidates. The Liberals around 105. The NDP only have about 50 or 60 candidates ready to go. They say that they've paid off their last campaign debt, but it's almost as if this was, more about, I want a longer runway to be even more critical of the Liberals in Singh's mind. but not taking into account the real life implications of what he's actually said. So,
right. Let's talk about leadership for a second, and let's switch back to you, Bill, and the NDP, because as much talk as there is about Trudeau and the Liberal leadership, we talk a lot on the Curse of Politics about how the NDP should be just as desirous of getting rid of Singh as Liberals are of getting rid of Trudeau. I mean, Singh is not... they're going to lose a lot of their current members. He's shown no ability to catch on. He doesn't look like he's ever going to catch on. And why is he so safe? Why is the NDP caucus so docile in the face of this impending doom on their part?
Well, the party just doesn't really have that history of knifing their leaders. It hasn't really happened.
Tom Mulcair.
Tell that to Mulcair.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah. Yeah, well, certainly not heading into an election campaign. So I think...
he got fired for winning 45 seats, right? I presume they carry Singh around on their fucking shoulders if he won 45 seats.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so I think he's got another campaign to go, and I don't think there's anybody angling to get rid of him. There's no particularly obvious person who's itching for the job either, which is, in some ways it's the same as the Liberals. There's not one person that's just sitting there waiting in the wings. You could argue Mark Carney, but he doesn't seem to ever really actually want to do it. So
I disagree with Bill there. Bill, I'd say that, don't you think that... I do think that this is Singh's last crack at it.
I agree. Yeah.
I think his leadership is on the line, and we'll have some signals of what happens in Elmwood-Transcona next week at the by-election in the Winnipeg area riding, which ought to be held by the NDP if the Conservatives are able to snatch that away. But even if, let's say, the NDP succeeds in holding that riding, this fall will really test Mr. Singh's skills. He's appointed his chief of staff, Jen Howard, as their campaign director. She's a super smart woman. She was a minister in a Manitoba government. She's able to run a campaign. I have no doubts about her skills. But for Mr. Singh's leadership, I would say that even if you think there's no one star in the wings, there are people out there like Avi Lewis. Do you not think he would jump at the chance to run in a race for the job of leadership? Now, he's not talking that much these days because guess what? He's been nominated as a candidate in their riding out west in BC. But I don't discount. Everybody thinks people are indispensable. Nobody's indispensable, even Justin Trudeau. People rise to occasions once they get in positions where they either see an opportunity or seize an opportunity. So I'm not counting out the fact that Mr. Singh's leadership is really on the line right now, and it's a test of his skills.
But no pressure coming from the caucus, Bill, is what you're saying.
Yeah, not before the election. Unless he does much better in the next election campaign, I think it's pretty clear there'd be questions about replacing the leader. But until we get to that campaign, I see no evidence of any effort to replace him. Certainly now, especially now that it could be at any time, really.
Liberal MPs are gathering for a national caucus in Nanaimo this week. So we shall persist in reminding them about the contributions our sponsor CN makes to the economy just outside the doors of their retreat. British Columbia has two major seaports, the Port of Vancouver and the Port of Prince Rupert, which is actually the closest naval departure point for Asia on the west coast of North America. Both ports plug into Canada's vast trade arteries and handle billions of dollars of incoming and outgoing cargo a year, much of it moved by CN. CN employs 2,657 railroaders in BC and operates more than 2,800 route miles of track. In the past 10 years, the railway has spent more than $3.3 billion building out and reinforcing its network in the province. Just about the entire output of British Columbia's forestry sector moves by train at some point. Same goes for minerals from BC mines and manufactured products from BC factories. Given the wild terrain in that spectacular province, hauling cargo can sometimes be tricky. CN's tracks hug mountainsides, follow rivers, and disappear into forests. Doing that safely requires training and practice. Earlier this month, as the mayor of Smithers and her councillors watched, CN, along with the RCMP and various first responders, staged a mock derailment and fuel spill on the Bulkley River. That exercise takes place annually around BC. And throughout this hot, dry summer, CN's mighty firefighting trains have deployed to help contain wildfires in the province. I should mention here that CN both supports and relies upon Indigenous communities across BC. No one else possesses their level of expertise in environmental stewardship. Anyway, the fact is, the relationship between the railways and BC goes clear back to the founding of our country. Its importance to Canada's economy is self-evident. Of all the Liberals you talked to, did any of them think we were going to win the election? Think the Liberals were going to win the election?
Do they think the Liberals are going to win the next election?
Yeah.
Well, they can read polls. At this point, I hear people, here's how I hear them, how people put it to me. The Prime Minister thinks there's a path to victory he can win. That's how they put it to me. They don't put it to me that we're going to take this. They talk about how all the stars have to align for them. And if things, carry through to the spring. And so they'll talk about things like, what happens in the US if interest rates continue to come down, if inflation cools. And it's not just that those numbers, those economic numbers come down, but that they ripple through the economy and are felt by people. If that happens, will private developers start building more housing supply? Who knows? So if those stars align, sort of that luck kicks in, and then they do some significant change on either the policy front or who knows, big changes, other big changes, that they're, they talk a good game about optimism, but I don't hear anyone saying outright, we've got this, we're going to beat this guy. They hope that the more Canadians see of Pierre Poilievre, the more they dislike him. Hope is not a strategy. Hope could be a campaign theme if he had something to put in the window to say, here's why we deserve 4 more years. But even that's a tougher challenge for the Liberals, because you don't hear that from them. What you hear is the deliver, continue to do the things we've been doing.
What does that even mean? What would they have to deliver now that is more compelling than what they have already, quotes, delivered? Nobody knows what they've delivered or thinks it's of value, or the polls would be different.
Well, look, it's my sense that the party, the Liberal brain trust, the inner circle, thinks that they've had a big communications challenge in conveying to voters exactly that, what they have done for them, the big things. And that if they do a better job of explaining, you've got pension reform, you've got childcare, $10 a day childcare rolling out, we've brought in this dental stuff, you're getting 2 free, you will be, none of that's in place yet. The pharmacare programs, free contraceptives and insulin and diabetes devices are not in place yet. But they think that if they convey to Canadians what they have done, that will make a difference. And where I think that what MPs, circling back to sort of where we were at the beginning of this conversation, going into that retreat, wanted to hear, yes, that, and what else? What else have you got in the wings? How else are we going forward? What else is going to happen? And this idea that it's a communications challenge and that they have to double down on what they're doing
is loser talk.
Is not invigorating their troops. And I think that they're going to get a bit of a wake-up call.
Well, wait, let's just explore this. I mean, how would their comms get better? And Bill, you can jump in here too. I mean, what would make their comms better now than it's been in the past? Oh my God,
it's not our job to advise them.
And how dumb do you have to be to think that if people find out about your insulin plan, they won't care about the fact that you're going to raise the carbon tax again next spring? Like, are they not? My point is, are they not confronting the seriousness of the issues that are giving them these headwinds?
Yeah, I mean, like to Donna's point, it's not our job to give them comms advice, but I think the one thing I'll be watching for in terms of like what on the policy front that they need to roll out on is obviously the immigration issue, which is a mess of their own creation that they've suddenly now seized upon, and you're starting to see with the changes to student visas and that kind of thing, it's had an impact positively on rental pressure in the big cities. And so, those kinds of things, I can imagine they want to focus on it and escalate those so that you're taking some of the steam out of that issue that has just been, the Conservatives have been hammering them over the head on. So I think that's one thing to watch for. But to your point, there's not huge policy issues that are of their own creation that they have in the window that they're trying to implement at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, Trudeau doesn't have an answer to the question about what is it I'm going to deliver.
Right.
Further, right?
Well, all right. Here's the other thing, though, and I know you don't discount this, David, but nor do the Conservatives. Is the Liberals' ability to react and pivot when called on when crises are in front of them, right? The NAFTA renegotiation was deftly done by this government. The dealing with the Trump steel and aluminum tariffs was very deftly done. Bits of those strategies are in play once again in this EV supply chain fight with China right now, and the ability and the sort of desire to stay on side with the US. They did react and quickly and by many accounts, although not the Conservatives' account, to the pandemic, the requirements early on in the pandemic. Don't forget, Canada had sort of successes on that during that crisis, a global pandemic on many fronts. Also some failures, but by and large, they've shown they can react to things very well. But reactive is not proactive, as we know in politics. And they're not obviously telegraphing a lot of what they're doing behind closed doors right now to people like Bill and I. But I think that in that whole, you talk about the immigration housing piece, they've got to be thinking their way through how do they deal with it. They're going to be confronted with some things like on immigration reform in a minority parliament. If there are legislative pieces required, it's going to be a lot harder to do now. On immigration reform, though, they can do a good bit, such as capping various streams by regulation. So, I guess I'm just trying to keep my mind open to the possibility that there could be some inventive stuff coming forward. I don't know that to be the case, though.
Right. So something that currently happens, because nobody gets elected on the basis of what you did 7 years ago.
No.
Or I would be more successful at running campaigns.
No, I mean, that's it. Campaigns are always either about change or hope. And I think the genie it comes out when they can marry those two things, change and hope. And while Poilievre offers change, I haven't heard a big message of hope. It's often cast in downbeat themes, stop the crime and that kind of thing. The Liberals will try and project hope, but how do they also capture the change thing? And that's the challenge.
Right. Speaking of which, how was Alexandra Mendez received at the Liberal caucus?
Did you not notice, though, that her language was so careful about my constituents say you have to go. And I can guarantee you that is a message. That's what they heard last year in London as well. There were MPs that went to the mic and said, my constituents say you have to go, Prime Minister. It's a buffer. It saves them from saying, I think it's time for you to go. Look, there is still the prospects of a cabinet shuffle being dangled out there down the road. And like I said, we still don't know how many are staying or going. And if another couple of cabinet ministers decide to leave, then there could be a cabinet shuffle. It's also a way of keeping your grumpy MPs quiet, giving them hope that they've still got some career prospects.
How much of a prize is that, though, at this point?
I mean,
I guess you get a limo. You get a limo and a driver for a year or something. But I mean, it's look,
a year as a cabinet minister is better than no year as a cabinet minister.
I guess.
Right? I mean, the Conservatives told me back about a year into the Liberal government, this Conservative told me this great line, and I've often thought, yeah, that suits every government I've ever covered. This was a Conservative who'd been defeated, who had been in government before Trudeau won, and he said, a day in government is better than your worst day in government is better than your best day in opposition. And that captures it.
Well, and that's what's so telling when you're seeing Seamus O'Regan and Pablo Rodriguez and others signaling that they're heading for the exits. Like they don't want to sit in opposition, and that's, I mean, it's their actions are speaking louder than their words here on this front. They do not see a future of them being in cabinet come after the next election, presumably, or they wouldn't be leaving.
I don't underestimate, though, the toll after 9 years on families, and in Seamus's case, he put forward that it was a family thing. You know, in some cases you have to take them at their word on that, but in others it really doesn't ring true.
Right. So the Liberals threw a big distraction at their caucus, and they introduced Mark Carney as an advisor and had him speak to the caucus. Let's start with you, Bill. What do the NDP think about Carney?
Well, they just kind of link him into their big business rhetoric and dismiss him that way.
But what do they really think? Not what's their spin. What do they think about Carney?
Yeah, I was talking about background with one of them. They quite like him, actually. That was one person I was talking to. You know, he's a personality that's been around Parliament Hill forever, you know, Bank of Canada briefings and that kind of thing. So he is a known quantity for people who've been on the Hill for a while, decent guy, but it's whether his political skills are of threat to his rivals or not. I don't think people see him that way as being particularly significant politically.
Okay, so they're not afraid of a leadership change to Carney. How did he go over in Nanaimo? Tonda.
I would say there are three camps among the Liberals on Mark Carney. One, the people who think he would really be their foil to Pierre Poilievre and put, you know, that squirt in his place kind of thing. You know, like they are chomping at the bit for a Carney-Poilievre fight.
Right.
There's a camp that doesn't really know him, doesn't understand what he would bring. Would he be the right guy for them? And then there's a camp that is very skeptical of his ability and don't like the fact that he hasn't run for office at all as an MP. Don't like the fact that he's been playing coy on what he would do to help them. I mean, it's been since the 2021 convention where Carney came out and said he'd do anything he could to help re-elect the Liberals. And so they see that he hasn't put in, you know, he hasn't walked the talk, and they don't like it.
What would they have expected him to be doing?
And I also hear from people saying, well, why would he have to run as an MP? He doesn't need to do that. That's not, you know, when he decides to come into a race, if there is ever a leadership race, then he brings automatic oomph. He's got a huge CV behind him, and we all know it, right? A central bank governor of two countries' banks, and all the time he has in the private sector behind him and whatnot. So he's really impressive on paper. But that same camp that there's that same camp that is kind of skeptical and wishes he'd done some work. There's also people within that think, does he have the retail skills? And what Bill was saying, right? Does he have the retail? I have seen him, like, absolutely, he is very interesting. I've seen him captivate a small crowd. People are interested. He did pretty well in the scrum he did in Nanaimo too. He had some lines. He stuck to them. They were pretty good. But I've also seen him be really thin-skinned when challenged, and I also have seen him flop in a room. I think were you at that? Did you watch his speech at the Eurasia Group's conference in Canada?
I did, yeah. I did, yeah. Oh
my God! Like, he could not have bored that audience who was so eager to hear him more. It was a deadly speech delivered badly. So, you know, I think that those three camps within the Liberals, I think mostly, though, overwhelmingly, there would be a group that would be very open to him coming in.
Yeah, there's definitely a camp of Liberals who would like to see Carney come in, and that is the group who feel they are on the more fiscally conservative side of the party. And, you know, whether, you know, he may not be a great political rally speaker, he would nonetheless represent a response to the problems that the party is facing, which Pierre Poilievre has capitalized on, which is the view among some that this is a government that just spends too much, that does not care about fiscal issues, economic matters, jobs, all that kind of stuff. And having Carney in place would help blunt that criticism in their view. So there's certainly, you know, either, you know, in the caucus and, you know, former caucus members, eager to support him if he jumps in. It's hard to tell. Like, they're certainly not, you know, agitating like we've seen in past Liberal leadership battle.
Yeah,
right.
It's more like they're, if he jumps in, great, we'd love him to jump in, but I can't tell. It doesn't really seem like there's a whole lot of ground game going on.
So him aside, Bill, did the NDP fear a Liberal leadership change at all? Do they think that would materially affect them?
It hasn't really come up, so I guess it would really depend on who the next leader is.
I mean, their caucus chair described Trudeau as radioactive, so presumably
exactly.
They have a sense of how he's doing politically. So it didn't come up at their conference?
Yeah, well, only in that sense of the radioactiveness of Trudeau, that comment there. I mean, when you see the Conservatives jump on Carney whenever he gets attention, you kind of get the sense that the rivals of the Liberals would like to run against Trudeau and not somebody else. So I think that's clear. Obviously, the big question is who that person would be if they go down that road.
Right.
Yeah, I don't. I can't think of the NDP really having strong views on whether he stays or goes. I think, well, they're in a real bind, obviously, because as Tonda mentioned, a big election campaign is always change, and now we're at the 10-year mark, and that just becomes so powerful. And you're seeing Jagmeet Singh in his videos now, he's saying change, right? And he's trying to jump on that bandwagon, but it's very hard to do when you've been so closely tied to the Liberals and Trudeau. So that's what they're trying to do. It's not going to be easy to pull off at all.
He's trying.
I want to come back, Tonda, to one last thing about the mood in the Liberal caucus on this leadership question. Because if you look at history, he's not likely to run again, Trudeau. Okay? Like, faced with this kind of a situation in the polls, Pierre Trudeau did not run. Faced with this kind of a situation in the polls, Brian Mulroney did not run. Mm-hmm. Right? Stephen Harper never faced this situation in the polls. He was never this far behind. It was never inconceivable that he would win. So when it's inconceivable that you'll win, you don't run. So it's really a question of timing. And so Trudeau left in his 5th year, and Mulroney left in his 5th year. And so the question is the caucus prepared to let Trudeau's personal timing determine what is likely an inevitable change in leadership?
I think my sense from everyone I've talked to is that they are all prepared to let Trudeau decide his own timing. I haven't heard anyone say there is a move afoot to boot him. And that is also a different effort than it was in the days of the Paul Martin, Jean Chrétien years, right? You guys in the Martin camp had basically you had control of all the electoral district associations, all the executives. You had control of a party machinery in a way that is no longer required because of the rules changes.
Oh God, you're warming my heart.
See, that's the point from 26 years on the Hill. Anyway, no, look, it's a different calculation now. And so also don't forget that most of this, to Bill's point about there's no like Chrétien Martin kind of camps and debate, most of this caucus, all of this caucus really has come in under Justin Trudeau's leadership on his, in some cases, coattails back in 2015.
All of them. All of them.
Yeah, okay. I'm trying to leave open the possibility that I'm forgetting somebody. But, pretty much all of them say, whenever I talk to them about this, it's always, he gets to choose. It's his decision. Do I think he should go? They couch it, they're cagey, they're very, very careful. But he gets to choose. So the short answer is, yeah, they're ready to let him pick the timing.
So here's a question for both of you. And Bill, I know you're in a busy place, but do the caucus members have a different view of their role and their status than they used to? Because you're describing a caucus that is very, very deferential to leadership. And as we know, that's not always been the case. And I'm wondering whether the phenomenon, particularly in the Liberal Party, of what you described about the Trudeau coattails in 2015 and a brand new caucus, but also with the NDP and their approach to Singh, whether caucuses are just more deferential to leadership now than they used to.
Oh, it's night and day. I mean, we've all been around in the Chrétien Martin years and used to have characters in caucus, the Roger Galloways and the Carolyn Parishes, and they would go to the mic and hold court and say what was on their mind. And those days are gone. Like, it's nothing but, like, unfortunately for Tonda and I, those days are gone. Like, it's just talking points, and they are so strict. An event like this is just crawling with handlers, and an MP will walk by and you'll say, okay, can you come talk? And then they'll go and get permission, right? Like, there's all these 20-year-olds all over the place that the MPs have to go to get permission to speak to.
You depress me.
The same is true of the Conservatives, right? I mean, remember when Stockwell Day was in a leadership crisis? My God, there was a whole caucus that broke away from him, led by, the Chuck Stralls of the world. Rest in peace. He was a lovely man. That era of politics is over. That is the same is true of all of the caucuses.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so if that's their position, they take what they're given. What were they given? Did either one of these caucuses hear a compelling electoral strategy or plan that would change for the fortunes and the trajectory of their party in the next year?
I mean, to ask the question is to answer it, really. And let's face it, I love that you think that we're inside the caucus room. I love that you think that they walk out there and spill their guts to us. They don't. As far as I know, the Liberals did get some, I guess, broad outlines.
They used to BlackBerry you from the caucus, Tonda.
Yeah, but I'm telling you, those days are over. That was when you had control of a whole interesting group of people. But no, I mean, look, we've heard that they heard some communications plans. We've heard stuff like that. But I think that, I was told that it was going to be both listening mode and telling them where they're at mode. But stay tuned. Invite me back next week, and maybe I'll have an answer for you on that. But they're all in transit today, and I haven't gotten the sense that they all are leaving that caucus with a great sense that woohoo, we've got the roadmap to another victory.
Bill, what did the NDP caucus members from British Columbia and Northern Ontario hear that would make them believe they could hold their seats?
Well, I think for the BC MPs, it was interesting talking to some of them just on background about the provincial election, because they think that is going to be a real test case of some of Pierre Poilievre's messaging, because the BC Conservatives have essentially emerged on the scene on the coattails of Pierre Poilievre. They saw he was doing very well in the polls, and they've just essentially matched his messaging word for word in some cases. And so the NDP believe that might have peaked somewhat and is starting to fade. I mean, that's their perspective. We'll see, but it is a genuine test run where voters in BC are going to be able to weigh in on some of these slogans and messaging from the Conservatives. So we'll see how that plays out. I think BC.
Yeah, except that, Bill, if I could just say, EB's at 45% and Singh's at 25%. Right? So these are not they can call it a surrogate fight, but it's not the same thing.
Well, a surrogate test of the Conservative messaging, I guess.
Right.
And I thought it was interesting to close out this morning. So they had their 3 days. When they showed up, it was kind of strange because they really didn't seem to have any idea what their policy priorities were going to be in the fall. They were all still, especially when they walked in and hadn't met yet, kind of still getting their head around the loss of the supply and confidence deal and what it meant. And no one really had an answer as to what comes next. And they said that would be the topic of discussion. So they've had their 3 days of discussion, and now they've come out and they do at least have a list that they can list off. And that's things like grocery prices, which is Singh wants to cap grocery prices similar to France. Kamala Harris has a similar proposal. There's that. There's climate change, affordable housing, Indigenous issues. So kind of what you would expect. One of the somewhat surprising things out of his closing news conference, though, was he was asked by the Canadian press about his position on the carbon tax, because Pierre Poilievre says he wants to immediately have a carbon tax election. And he didn't go all the way out and say it, but he really is distancing himself now from the consumer side of the carbon tax. And he said that they're working on an alternative, so that was interesting, and that it's going to come out in the next few months. So it's pretty clear that the NDP is also realizing that Singh has been effective, that Poilievre's been effective at kind of framing the debate. Potentially, at least for some people, this would be a carbon tax election, and they don't want to be on the side of a consumer tax. It certainly sounds like. So the tea leaves would suggest some kind of increase on the industrial side, perhaps, of the carbon plan and breaks on the consumer side. We didn't get details, obviously, but I thought it was interesting that he said they're clearly not in favor of the status quo.
He said exactly that in May, and yet he still has no policy to roll out. They gave us a boatload of crap for writing that in May and said that they would look at the industrial price and we'll have a new policy and a new plan. And months later, they still cannot answer those questions around those specifics. And so, to me, that's the astonishing part. If I was an NDP MP, I would have thought that they would have had sort of some of those details. And they don't. That laundry list he gave in that news conference today, the price cap on groceries, fascinating. How's he going to do it? But the other stuff, it's like almost like the Liberals. Actually, they're all taking a page out of Poilievre in a sense that, here's my list and I'm sticking to it.
And
the arse is out of climate change as a political issue, eh?
It's very challenging.
It was interesting, too, in the U.S., the Democratic Convention, we had days and days of speeches and nobody talked about climate change. So that gives you an idea of how that's polling.
You got a minute at the end of the debate.
Yeah,
at the end of the debate between Trump and Harris, they had a minute for climate change. And, of course, Trump didn't address it at all, and she didn't say anything substantive. So it's bad politics right now.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's bring this around to a conclusion now, which is these two parties have had their war sessions to get ready for the fall. What do you expect this fall?
I think why these lists are important is because we've seen how the key votes on budgets and fall updates work. Is a lot of the negotiating is really done in public. We've got the Bloc has already put out some of their lists. There's a seniors benefit the Liberals brought in that kicks in at age 75, and the Bloc wants to come in at 65. That's pretty expensive as the Liberals want to go down that road. And you take the criticism of partnering with the Bloc, so that's an option. Now there's a list from the NDP that the Liberals could probably overlap with in some ways, but probably wouldn't go all the way. I don't think there's appetite on things like price caps on groceries. So I think one of the things too, beyond what we've already discussed, I think what's different now is with the end of the supply and confidence deal, it just adds a lot more energy and juice to whenever there is a crisis. Some big shiny thing comes along, and that always happens in politics, especially federal politics. There's always something that for at least 3 days seems like the biggest thing in the world, and everything has changed, and then we've moved on to something next by the next week. But in that moment, now you can have a confidence vote, or everything is just far more uncertain and unbalanced every time there's the next big thing that seems like it should bring down the government. So I think that's one of the interesting dynamics that we'll see over the next few months.
Well, Tonda, what are you looking forward to this fall?
Well, I agree with everything Bill just said. And I would just add, though, I think that the Bloc Québécois, for example, has put on its list giving Quebec more powers, more money, more say over matters, especially immigration. And I think that because immigration, as it ties into the housing supply issue and the pressures on cost of living, is going to be, I don't want to call it the sleeper issue, but it's going to be a politically very important one for politicians to deal with deftly and not to fall into rhetoric that amplifies divisions in this country and demonizes any section of the country, any region, or any group. And that's a tricky thing. We've seen, and so I'm not talking about the minority parliament per se and its workings, but I'm talking about the political temperature that comes when we're having these conversations nationally. And I think therein lie some risks for leaders and risks for the country. And I'm going to be watching very carefully because I think the divisive nature of politics right now can't be denied. You know, and I do worry quite a lot about the threats that lots of politicians face on all sides of the spectrum. I've written about it, but I am concerned about the rise in all kinds of hate and nasty rhetoric. And I think the politicians, I'm not sure, do they all have that deft a touch to manage the rhetoric in this minority parliament? So that's kind of not really a policy or related thing or the machinations of government thing, but it's more a step back and what do minority governments look like? Well, they can be pretty tense.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, you two, this was really stimulating. Thank you very much. It's a lot of fun having this conversation.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for the invite.
Yeah, Bill, good of you to fight through the rowdy NDP caucus members behind you in the hotel. All right, I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN, all you Herle Burly-ites who watched or listened, and of course, Tonda and Bill for being with us here today. Come back next week for more of the Herle Burly. See you then.
Herle Burly, Herle Burly.